Welcome back to Phenomenon Radio Live exclusively here on KGRAradio.com. A fascinating first hour with our honored guest, Chuck DeCaro. And here to kick off hour 2 is John Burroughs. John?
Thanks, Ray. Chuck, very like Ray said, a very interesting first hour. You made some great counterpoints. And before we went to break, you were talking about Lieutenant Colonel Corso, and you said that, you brought up the fact that he only made Lieutenant Colonel and that he had some observations on different technology or whatever that could have come from alien technology. And one of the things we were going to get into was the fiber optics part. And you said you could counter each thing that he basically pointed towards alien technology and how we developed it. So you want to start with fiber optics?
How do fiber optics work? You got a glass fiber, and it's clear all the way through, and you send light through it, in this case, laser light, which is collimated light, going through it, and it comes out the other end. So by winking on and off, 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, 1, on, off, you have a digital pathway. Okay. Now, let's take that fiber, which is thinner than human hair, make it bigger, okay? Let's say half an inch, okay? It's still a fiber, right? It's still clear in the middle, and it's made out of glass or plexiglass, and it conducts light, correct? Where would you find such a thing in 1947?
Well, we're waiting.
No, on the front end of 1947 Pontiac automobiles. And what it was an accessory that you could buy, which was a plexiglass rod, a cylinder, maybe 1.5 feet high with a little orange plexiglass top on it. And the way this thing communicated to you is when your headlight went out, the pole stopped glowing. Okay? That's enough to say, I have something here that conducts light and sends messages. In this case, it's on, off, just once, because the headlight isn't working. Okay? It doesn't take much to go from there to say, okay, how about if I make this smaller and longer?
Listen, if I may interject, you guys, in the early 1900s, Tesla worked on this. He thought it would go nowhere because you had to have it simply line of sight. You could run light through a glass tube, but it had to be straight. They couldn't get it to bend around corners. It was the cladding. So you get a fiber. It was the cladding that they put around it that allowed it to be utilized later. And I think that's what Corso talked about. Yeah.
Okay, well, let me add just one more piece from some of the interviews that were recorded. They're on audio and video. And there were people back in 47 who said that there were what they called looked like horse hair, like a tail of a horse or the mane, and that the horse hair was coming out in between the walls. There were double walls on the craft that some of these people saw, an outside skin and an inside skin, and coming out from between those skins was what they said was a lot of horse hair. That was a word that people who knew nothing about fiber optics or anything else used. And so we have to take that term, that it looked like horsehair, and that meant there had to have been thousands, maybe tens of thousands of extremely thin wire. Fiber optic.
Fiber, yeah. Maybe, but, there's still no definitive proof of this because there were conventional technologies which, when ameliorated over time, advanced over time, would have reached where fiber optics reached to this day. The way you had it going was the laser, and there's a line of development of laser, which means light amplification through stimulated emission of radiation. Okay, and before the laser, there was a maser that did the same thing using microwaves. Now, I will though. I hate to tell you this because I know you're going to go into outer space with it, but if I told you that the United States government during World War II had a secret unit that was designed to recover alien technology. Now, this alien is a small a, alien technology, okay? And that they were operating from late 43 until 45, and that I can give you the physical name of the unit. Would you believe me?
Yeah, because that was the Germans were the alien and they wanted that technology.
No. Actually, it was the Japanese who were the small A and aliens. And the unit was called the 555th Parachute Infantry Regiment. And the 555th was composed completely of African-American paratroopers. And their job was to capture alien technology and suppress the information. Yeah, we actually did that. And the alien technology was called fugu. And it was Japanese balloons in the thousands, launched across the Pacific with incendiaries and frag bombs, okay? And we took a huge deep breath because the military knew that the Japanese were actively using bubonic plague against Chinese in China by dropping by parachute, rats with fleas infected with bubonic plague and dropping them in Chinese cities. That's the fact. You can go and look at that. And some of the results were captured by us. Another interesting post-war story from a place called Mukden, which had a Japanese biological warfare camp where they used Allied prisoners of war, as they called them, logs, for testing. In any case, we were worried that they would do that here. And the Japanese sent over thousands of fugu balloons. Now, the job was to suppress information and to suppress the fires that they would cause. So the members of the 555th, the triple nickel, jumped in, and they were the first smoke jumpers. Their job was put the fire out, capture any technology, put a security around it, wait for the experts to come in because they're bombs and they could go off, and remove them without anybody seeing it. And if anybody did see it, you had to kind of, talk to them so they wouldn't say anything about it. So yeah, did we do that? Yeah. Did we get alien technology? Yeah. But the 555th was disbanded after the war. Could it be that you can get some veterans together? Yeah, that's why I go start looking, the old boy network. But, it sounds like, that brings back images of Kecksburg, doesn't it?
Okay, Chuck, so I've got a question for you before we go into the Korea thing. We talked about Corso and the technology and how we could have this stuff. But one of the statements, and if you go back into the 60s, 70s, even the early 80s, all the old science fiction stuff is today's reality, technology-wise.
Right.
Every single thing that we've developed now, from just the thought of people would laugh, to include to the stars today, which is part of the video release, which is talking about interstellar travel and warp drive that they're working on.
Right.
All of that can be explained, and it's not ET technology. I mean, you've done the research, you've worked in the DoD. We've developed that ourselves.
Right.
There's nothing out there at all. There's
nothing that I've ever seen, advanced radars and this stuff that all you got to do is read Aviation Week. Start reading Aviation Week from pre-war, through the end, and you get hints of all this stuff that's coming, including things like, the centimeter wave radar. You could see it coming. Atomic bombs. Well, there were reports prior that got out there. The Chicago Tribune published a front page story about Midway, revealing that the reason why we got them so well in Midway is because we were breaking their codes. Luckily, the Japanese didn't get a copy of the Chicago Tribune because that was the truth, and it leaked out because of an overheard conversation, and away went the Chicago Tribune. Okay, so the kinds of stuff that we got today, I can point to a development path.
Okay, one question.
Yep.
Plasma technology.
Plasma.
Yeah, plasma itself. I'm not talking about the stuff we've made now, but the plasma, the phenomenon of the plasma stuff that's so, I don't know, it is secretive because when you research it, you can find stuff on it, but it really does involve so much of what we're doing today and going forward. Where did all that come from?
Well, I'll give you an example. Tesla. Okay, Tesla is onto a lot of things. In fact, Linda and I were there at the founding. Remember that founding meeting of the Tesla Society? Remember that?
Yeah, it was fascinating.
1983. Okay. So at the time, a few years later, almost contemporaneous, 83, 84, there's a guy named Dr. Golka, not Gorka, Golka. Remember him?
Yes.
And he rented a hangar at Wendover and was coming up with a plasma weapon. And he got the idea by using the ionizing radiation in the air created by a giant Tesla coil, and he was attempting to create a preferential pathway using a laser through which or upon which this plasma ball would ride. And he ran out of money. But the point was, he took an ancient technology, added a new ancient, a 100-year-old technology, added the supporting technologies to make it close to reality, and experimented with that stuff. In fact, if you look at the Gap video, I remember having an interview with Golka about this stuff. So even plasma, we've been researching in different ways. Were we successful at the time? No. Can you go back and look at things that had they had supporting technology? Sure. Let's take a look at the M61 cannon in many U.S. fighters. You know where that cannon came from? The Gatling gun. Okay, our fighters are equipped with Gatling guns, except they aren't hand cranked; they're electrically cranked. Take a look up at M61 cannon. So
right.
So there.
Well, I understand, I understand that, but there's just like the RF weapons and the EM frequencies and the plasma technology, and even Condyne said that there's a phenomenon involving, you could go to plasma or whatever, that is intelligent in nature, and they're really not sure what it is. So I guess that's where I'm going with this, because obviously the cutting edge think tanks would want to know about this and work on it.
And
I'm sure, but
Chuck,
there's no evidence that it. Yeah, go ahead.
I was in Hessdalen in Norway about 10 or 12 years ago with a group of scientists from both Oslo and Italy. And every night we were there, they had all kinds of astronomical equipment to study what all of us saw every night. And we were in the mountains above the tree line. This is very important. So we had clear view in all directions. And then there would be suddenly this blast of light. I saw it several times with my own eyes. And the astronomers ended up capturing on one of their spectrometers, it was equivalent to a tremendously high temperature. And it sustained itself for a period of time that they said was incomprehensible to their studying of known Earth physics. And when we went back one night from having seen these various lights, and they would come, sometimes they would hold, sometimes there would be one at one end of the valley and another one way in a mountain that might be, like 100 miles away. And you would see these lights as if they were interacting with each other, but instantaneously and very, very strange. And they had the astronomical data, which was strange. And when we went back one night, one of the astronomers from Italy said, I really am beginning to wonder if we are dealing with programmed plasmas. And he went on to use the analogy. He said, if we wanted to send something to another planet, another solar system, another galaxy, plasma is I believe this is correct, after hydrogen distribution, is the most common substance in this universe. And he said, if you knew how to take advantage of the minus and plus charges, and you could program plasma, just like we program a computer, he said, this might be what these lights are about, that they are, in fact, upload, download intelligences that are programmed plasmas. But what would contain them? How could they persist with a high temperature over time without any diminishing? He had no explanation, but I never have forgotten that discussion. after that night when we saw so many of the lights.
But what you're describing to me are also the piezoelectric effects that you find around earthquake faults. You get such tremendous high pressure there, they occasionally loose these balls of plasma.
Oh, but I
mean that, and
I know.
And
exactly.
Also around volcanic eruptions, you get lightning and you get ball lightning or plasma forms. So I mean, and they could look like that they are communicating with each other, depending about the energy being, radiated from the Earth.
In living in Denver and working at Channel 7, I went out to the Colorado School of Mines specifically to see their experimentation with large granite under tremendous pressure.
Tremendous pressure,
Okay, and
you get the RF burst.
And they had the video that was at a microscopic level almost, but I was there. And the so-called release of that energy under tremendous pressure was tiny. And there was absolutely not the scientists there that were showing me this and demonstrating said the idea that this would create anything that it looks like plasmas moving around in the sky and people saying they're 300 feet in diameter over their farm is ridiculous. And so I've never forgotten that.
No, I'm talking about the phenomena you were describing in Norway.
Yeah, but they would never have been from the pressure of anything that was seismic because that, as they showed me and demonstrated, it was tiny and it was close to the rock. These were bright. These were blasts of white light. I mean, it was just really intense.
Well, again, when you're looking at the size of the Earth versus the size of a 3-inch diameter, I believe that was correct, about 3-inch diameter piece of granite. Is that right? 3-4 inches?
You mean at the Colorado School of Mines?
Yeah, Colorado Spring Mine, yeah.
Oh, no. They had, it was huge. They had brought in a huge boulder, and they had a big press. Then as the press came down on the big boulder, they had a little screen on a camera. You couldn't, if I had been standing there, I would never have seen anything. They had a video and a screen to show this tiny release of the energy in the rock. In Hessdalen, the reason we were there is because the residents down in the valley of Hessdalen for years had talked about these strange lights that flashed up in the top of the Hessdalen mountain. And that's why we were there studying it.
Was that Marfa, Texas? Is that what we're talking about, Marfa lights?
No, Marfa.
We're talking about the same phenomenon.
No,
it turned out to be.
Hessdalen in Norway is quite different. The Marfa lights, they're close to the ground. Whatever they are, they seemed, how it got started in history is that people would say, usually at night, that something that was spherical, about the size of a grapefruit is one of the comparisons, or maybe up to the size of a basketball, would be about 4 to 5 feet above the ground, and it would follow them. And that was the Marfa lights, and some of those in the Midwest became famous because people said the lights actually followed them as if they were being watched or followed, whatever that phenomena is.
Yeah. Do you, when you fly in an airplane, you look out at the wing, you ever see these little black, 1/4-inch diameter rubber tubes that come out to a feathery end?
I think so. I think I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, what they are is they're dissipators, because if you fly through the air, you get the phenomena you're just talking about. It's called St. Elmo's fire. And, you'll see one of these things bouncing along the inside of a fuselage if you don't have those dissipators in there. That's why all aircraft have them, to preclude the buildup of St. Elmo's fire. And if you look up St. Elmo's fire, you're going to see the definition and examples of the same kind of phenomena you just described of, small spheres bouncing along. I'm not saying that's what's in Norway, but there could be phenomena with which we are not yet familiar.
Well, let me give you one more facet of Hessdalen. there had been a group of scientists that had been there for 2 or 3 years, and they had asked one of their scientists if he'd be willing to work through the winter. And in the year before, they had used laser lights as part of their experiment, where when one of these lights that would sustain would show up, they would pulse a red laser or a green laser at it just to see if they would get a reaction. So they had done this several times in that, what we'll call the Norwegian summer. And now I talked with this man who did this directly. And so he had volunteered to stay through the winter. And he said one night he was sitting with his various instruments, and he had a laser, but he wasn't using it. And he had not seen a light to do anything, but he's got all of his technology around him, when a red dot appeared in the snow right in front of where he was sitting. And then another dot, red, and then a third. And then it started in a pattern. And he said, my God, that's like what we were doing with the lasers this summer to the lights. And he looked up. It was a starry, clear night. He could not see anything. And he said, after I looked up, and I'm sitting there totally alone in this vast, above the tree line of these Hessdalen mountains, and I looked back on the snow, and he said, it did it again. Red dot, red dot, red dot in the snow. And he said, I admit it. I gathered up all my technology and I left. It scared me.
Ran. Yeah, so, well, I don't have any explanation, but we're talking one data point and anecdotal, the kinds of things. Again, look up St. Elmo's fire and you'll see this phenomena, and we use dissipators to get rid of it in airplanes. Can it exist in other forms? Yeah. Are there unknown phenomena associated with the Earth? Yeah. There was that
when?
That incident in Africa. No, an incident in Africa where everybody in the village along the lake died, and they couldn't figure out how they'd suffocated. It turned out there was
methane.
Carbon, methane coming up from and they were poisoned in their sleep. And that brings up the idea in the Bible where the Egyptians were visited by a terrible death of all their firstborn males. Well, the firstborn males, being the ones that are going to take over the family, always had the coolest spot in the Egyptian house, which was at at the lowest level in the house where it's cooler. And could that methane example have happened from the Nile? Because remember, it turned blood red. Could that have been a seismic event that released the methane? Possibly, because it didn't get above 3 feet. So these are phenomena that suddenly become explicable. Oh, hang on a second. Could that be it? Don't know. So,
well, there are phenomena. There are phenomena that interact with this planet, which goes to the heart of this phrase that you find has been used since or before John F. Kennedy, probably going back to World War II or after. And that is an alien presence that has left its residue on the Earth, Mars, and the Moon, and that we are in a slice of the timeline of the Earth as humans with human perspective.
That's fine. I mean, you talk about that on Ancient Astronauts, and it's a lot. And, that, why not? It's possible. Certainly possible, and who's that buddy of yours? Giorgio,
yeah. Tsoukalos.
Yeah. I mean, he makes some interesting points. The problem is, and the points follow a good flow. The problem is you still have to get the evidence to get to where he's at. but boy, it's a good story, and there are pieces of logic there that certainly make sense.
Well, the Anunnaki cuneiform, that is clay that was fired.
Yep.
It does have figures, and it does have math, and it does have language, and it is a story about, if you just take the literal pictures, then the Anunnaki are depicted as being 2 to 3 times the height of the little Homo sapien in the carvings, and there are hundreds of thousands of these. So that alone depicts something that is highly different and makes you then stand back and say, if that was the Anunnaki and they were 2 to 3 times or 2.5 times the height of a Homo sapien, then you at least start with a data point in the fired Sumerian clay, of which the cuneiform is in the British Museum and the Louvre and Babylonia and all over the planet. And you have to look at that and say it's very possible that there was another than Homo sapien civilization that used this planet perhaps for millions of years before the first primates stood up.
Right. Well, again, it's really interesting stuff. What needs to be found is essentially an anthropological Rosetta Stone that shows how all this stuff connects with enough veracity, so that you can now say, yes, there was a prehistory, and it did this, and this.
Did you ever talk?
But it's not there yet.
Did you ever talk with Andy Marshall about the interplanetary phenomenon unit that existed from Truman on?
No, never. But I can tell you that, let's go back to the 555th. It seems to me, I remember reading somewhere that there were Army units, during the Cold War, there existed the possibility that a Mercury capsule could go down in the wrong place. And how would we get it out before the bad guys got to him? Right. And so there were units within the Army, and, I don't have my hands on a unit designation, but it sounds like the Interplanetary Recovery or Research Unit, Phenomenon Unit, which would be a cover for an operation designed to go in somebody else's territory and pull out the astronaut and blow up whatever the hell else was left, if they couldn't get it out. That's, I would look at that and see. And that makes sense because if those units existed, perhaps they weren't about alien technology, but about our technology or the bad guys' technology. Well, and the model, let me finish. The model for that would be the 555th PIR, and the units that remember, there was censorship during World War II. So you could tell a newspaper, you will not print this because you're violating, war powers of the United States, which authorized censorship during the war. So would it be possible to model a unit that goes and snatches our stuff or their stuff? Yeah, that makes sense. Sounds like Kecksburg to me. But
there is a big part of this, a facet we haven't talked about, and that is what happened at Malmstrom and our Minuteman nuclear missile sites back in the 60s to the 70s, of which Bob Salas, was one of the Air Force people down 80 feet underground in 60, I think it was 67. And he gets one of the communications from the sabotage alert team above, and they tell him that there is a huge ruby red glowing object parked right above the some kind of a gate that they had to the missile kilo that he was in. And that they were, what do we do? And then that was the same Malmstrom site where all of a sudden 10 missiles started going down. I believe it was every 10 seconds. And then I interviewed and talked with the Boeing engineer. This goes back probably to the early 90s that I got to talk with him. I think he passed, God rest his soul. But he told me that he got a call at Boeing about this situation of all of these Minuteman missiles literally going down offline every 10 seconds methodically and doing it twice. So it was a total of 20, but in 10 and then a repeat or somehow. And that he told me and recorded that it was not physically possible from all of the Boeing people who had put these missiles together. They did not know how this could happen because their system was never built to do such a thing, and that therefore, and these are the words I always remember, there was some sort of outside control that took over the system that is incomprehensible to us at Boeing. And that was related to the big red, ruby red glowing disc in the sky. And this happened dozens and dozens of times at all of the Minuteman missiles sites between the 60s and the 70s.
Yeah, well, it seems to me I've heard stuff like that, but every time I go to track it down, there's nothing there.
Oh, Bob Salas has done a whole book, and you can interview him yourself. I'll give you his phone number, and you can talk with him. He was only one of the many people who was not afraid ultimately to talk on the record, and many other people were intimidated. But all of this goes to today and the headlines this week. We've came away from what happened with Salas and others of interference with the missiles, in which it was concluded that the intelligence behind these interferences did not want us or anybody to launch a missile. That was the interpretation that Bob Salas had. So today we're now back to the head of North Korea and the head of the United States taunting each other about one or the other launching a nuclear missile at the other. What is your perspective on this new nuclear hot words anyway?
Well, from a historical perspective, the United States has made, up until recently, the same mistakes that Britain and France made with Hitler when he decided to rearm. He starts rearming after 1933, after the enabling legislation. The British saw it and the French saw it, did nothing. He then takes another step using some deception and rearms the Rhineland. Okay, and using deception, the British and the French thought he had a bigger force than they had, much bigger force than he actually had, and they did nothing. And then he unified with Austria. They did nothing. Well, and then Chamberlain, we're going to have peace in our time. Let's sell out Czechoslovakia, and then they call Sudeten Germans, and then all the rest of Czechoslovakia, and then he goes for Poland. Okay, and then there's a phony war, and 6 months later, Britain is in it for their life. Okay, it's existence. Well, what have we done? We have kicked the can of North Korea. I hate to use that awful cliche, but we kept pushing the problem further into the future. Now you've got a regime, a dictatorial regime that has the ability to launch weapons against the United States, and now we're flat-footed because it's come to the point of push comes to shove. Okay, now if you do nothing, again, you are vulnerable to nuclear blackmail. The North Koreans say, well, we're going to launch a missile at the South Koreans, and you, the United States, are going to either have to provide a nuclear umbrella or not, in which case we will dictate terms to South Korea. It's our fault we did nothing. Okay? Worse, in the Obama administration, the kinds of futuristic weapons that might have a great effect today were thrown away. The airborne laser, well, Secretary Gates said, well, I'm not really sure that's practicable, but, we need the money for something else. So they took this brand new 747 freighter, they put it in storage, and they disassembled it, and they chopped it up, and they sent it out as garbage. Okay, they stored it for a couple of years and said, no, we won't need this. And then they had another laser in the C-130, the tactical laser. We can't see the practical application of this. We'd rather save the money because of the sequester. So you had two weapons that, if they continue development, at least in the short range, let's say a few miles from the North Korean border, could have stopped a small force of missiles, not a big one, 2, 3, maybe. But we'd have a chance, and it would be a deterrence. It's like, okay, if we're not sure, but we think we can take out your missile. So once it goes up, you are now defenseless against a counterpunch. And we let that pass by the ways. We had another weapon that was the concept of a 20-foot-long tungsten steel penetrator that you would deorbit and have it re-enter at 17,000 miles an hour. And because it's tungsten, it wouldn't melt. It'd get really hot. And it would impact the Earth with such force as to replicate the energy released by a small nuclear bomb. And we decided, we need the money for something else, the sequester, and didn't do any further development on that. Come in really handy now because you need those kinds of weapons. Not there. So now you got conventional bombardment or nuclear against a tyrant whose psychological makeup we know nothing about, or we can only guess. Because anything, unless you have overwhelming deterrence, which we don't, that it's practical to use, which we don't, you're giving this guy a free hand to do what he wants to do. That's really scary.
Well, in today's Washington Post, they did an article, why, despite America's might, Trump's military parade that he's asked for cannot compare to North Korea's. And they make an answer inside of this article. They said the parades in Russia, China, and North Korea are all, quote, heavy on the heavy equipment, close quote. Unlike in other countries, there's a deliberate effort there to include systems that are visually impressive to reinforce that sense of the power of the state. They're picking things that look good on parade. A lot of things are very much parade oriented and they go into the types, but they're talking about what we would do in the United States, and that basically, would the United States ever do a military parade just for show?
We used to do it all the time.
No, but right now,
in the Eisenhower administration, the Kennedy administration, no, they weren't parades. They were called United States Air Force Firepower Demonstration. And the president would show up and attend. And you'd set up this firepower demonstration in Nellis, right next door to Area 51, and you would bomb the living hell out of it. Napalm, frag, HE, everything, rockets, guns. And the president would sit there for about an hour, while literally all hell broke loose. And the idea was, that's the guy in charge of this firepower. All you guys out there who want to threaten us, multiply this by 1,000, and that's what's coming. So I look at the parade, that's very nice. Let's go back to what Ike was doing and Kennedy was doing. If you go to YouTube and you look up U.S. Air Force Firepower Demonstration, okay, and put Kennedy or Ike, there's the president watching this stuff. Napalm by the ton. Boom. B-52s coming by, dropping, 105, 750-pound bombs. Boom. Okay? That's the kind of demonstration you want. So you see the president and the firepower, not just nice, clean, shiny tanks running down the street.
Well,
parade's a good idea, but it's small potatoes. It's little league stuff. Let's go back to when we're in the middle of the Cold War. You want to intimidate somebody? You want to come and bring it, because here's what we got.
It's close to the last paragraph in the Post today. It said, this was Senator John Kennedy from Republican from Louisiana, and he said, I think confidence is silent and insecurity is loud of Trump's parade idea. This was a rhetorical argument against the United States feeling the need to prove itself. But one might also argue that the U.S. military parade has been internationally ongoing for the past 5 decades. And my question was, in the context of this interaction with maybe unstable person in North Korea, is this a completely different climate in which to stop taunting and not have parades, but to do something that is serious, and yet we don't want to go into some sort of preemptive strike that would start a nuclear war. So that's what I'm asking you about, is the complexity of this moment of February 8th, 2018 in relationship to Korea and Trump.
Okay.
And this proposal of parades.
Okay. Let's look at what you can do in Korea, okay? The best thing to do, if you could do it, would be covert action that leads to the demise of the leader or the leadership, okay? Barring that is to influence those people who would come to power should the leader find his demise at the hands of those people who don't want to be nuked, okay? The third is to somehow create a popular uprising, which is unlikely because of the totalitarian nature of the North Korean state. Okay, we made a mistake like that. I want you to hear a homework assignment tonight is to look up UNPIC, United Nations Partisan Infantry Korea, which took heavy casualties because the early CIA was using the OSS model of parachuting into France and hooking up with the Maquis, the partisans, and creating all kinds of distraction upon the enemy military behind their lines. That didn't work in Korea because, there were informers on top of informers informing on the informers. So you really couldn't create a guerrilla unit. You might, over time, if you were patient, use an information warfare offensive that would, take the form of smuggling DVDs into the country, as we used to in the Cold War when we were throwing, one-channel radios over the wall for distribution so they could listen to Voice of America. There's that. And then there are incrementally increasing military options. But the kinds of things that would have been so technologically advanced, the Obama administration rescinded. So I would ask you to look up your homework assignment tonight, airborne laser, airborne tactical laser, and the kinetic penetrators. Sometimes the nickname for that is rods from God. All those went by the wayside. If you could come up with a technological solution that would enable the United States to strike without having to use nuclear weapons but have similar effects, that would be a way to do it.
But was a
not there.
That was a headline just 2 weeks ago, I think, showing an illustration. I think it was in the context of NASA and the Air Force or something about we're going to now start having laser weapons, and they said it, laser weapons in space.
Yeah.
Is that why
we've been using the ground-based stuff is fine.
Is that why they went to $65 billion increase per year?
$65 billion isn't a lot. It comes out to 40 B2s, or less.
No, but I'm just saying, on top of the defense budget already, they want an extra $65 billion as well.
Look, we look at our defense budget, but I remind you the opening statement of the Constitution, okay, is what are we doing? The very first phrase is provide for the common defense. Because without national security, you don't have a nation. So the cost, you can remember during the Eisenhower administration, we're looking 10% of the GNP went into defending for the Cold War. 10%. You might want to go look at those numbers as well. We've done this. We've simply forgot how we did it. Because it was our grandfather's time.
Chuck, does anybody know what the physics is of a laser that is beamed at a nuclear missile. What happens when a laser hits an armed nuclear missile?
Well, a couple of things. Depends on how the missile is fused and where it is at the time. But, it depends if it's a solid fuel missile or a liquid fuel missile, okay? The liquid fuel missile has pressurized tanks, and by heating it with a laser, you can get it to blow up, literally. I mean, the pressure differential within the tanks, which if pressurized, will cause it to explode because you weakened the structure. Solid fuel missiles is a little different. The other thing is, how much dwell time do you have to put enough heat on a target so it doesn't work? It depends. And laser power falls off over distance. So, it's not an infinite range weapon. You have to get in, for now, with current technology, pretty close. Now, we have shot down drones in the past, small, 20-footers, and we've gone up the scale to take out, smaller airplanes, that we're flying in a regular route that we control, so we put the laser on it. Okay. But still, having a laser puts doubt into the enemy's mind about a first strike. Because if I launch all my 10 missiles at the United States and 9 or 10 of them go away, now I have nothing to bargain with. I'm wide open because I just shot all my nuclear weapons and they went nowhere. Depending on the fusing of those nuclear weapons, if you could cause them to fall to Earth, they'd probably dud out because it depends on the arming mechanism of those things. And I think they're going to be relatively simple kinds of fusing, I think. So, if you could take them out in the boost phase, that would be a very good thing. But we don't have a weapon to do that yet.
Do you know what the status is on these laser weaponed aircraft?
Well, the airborne laser YAL-1 was, as far as I know, was broken up for scrap a couple of years ago during the Obama administration, and Secretary Gates signed off on it. The same with the advanced airborne laser, as I recall. That too was put to bed, and because the results were our results aren't good at extremely long ranges, and we have to wait for the technology to mature. Well, that's fine, but you don't need thousands of these airplanes, especially when you're talking about nascent nuclear powers like Korea and Iran, which have nothing like the technology of an airborne laser. And you have to get in close, and you may have to protect the airplane, and but it's still a technological lever with which the enemy has no countermeasure, and that gets into his thinking.
Mm-hmm.
We need now. You can't be sure that Kim Jong-un would react in a logical way, but his generals might.
Well, I was going to ask you what you personally think tonight on February 8th, 2018, is the biggest threat to the geopolitical territorial system that we have on this planet right now.
I think that the stagnation in the United States Congress is the biggest problem we have. No, I'm serious. It's becoming an internal security problem. That and the divisiveness that makes no sense in terms of national security. We have active bad guy threats working in a number of areas, not the least of which is the Russian utilization of the soft war principles that I pioneered, by using all the principles that are laid out in the books that I've written against us.
Infiltrating social media and all is what you mean.
Yeah, all of that, but in a very big way. I mean, you just have to go look at the Cyber War series, last of which was published 10, 15 years ago, how this is done. And they've manifested. Now, what's interesting about the Russians is that this is no longer an ideologically driven Soviet Ministry of Information. It's not that at all. What it is, the Lola phenomena. Lola being Putin, because whatever Lola wants, Lola gets. And what's happened is he has amalgamated all of the media, or almost all the media in Russia, that was at one point free, by having his buddies in his kleptocracy buy up all those media properties. Okay? So what you end up with is Russia today and its spin-offs doing really first-class TV, Linda. You know that from both of us having worked in television, that the first thing that a TV person thinks about, whether it's news or documentaries or entertainment, the very first thing is budget.
Right.
And the demographics they're going to reach is dependent on the budget. That's why we spend money. Well, they're spending the money. They just spent $500 million just on the RT, Russia Today, in English.
Right.
And they do really good work. So when they start warping, the story, it's so subtle and so well done that unless you're a TV pro like you and I are, it's hard to discern what you're looking at.
It was a great show.
Okay.
Yeah. Chuck,
okay.
Thank you for everything.
All right.
Yes.
Now I got to find my electrician.
Yeah. Good luck.
All right. Next week on Phenomenon Radio, we go on the road as Linda returns to the UFO Congress main stage in Phoenix, Arizona. And the KGRA will be there live on location, kicking off the KGRA On Tour 2018. I will be there along with John and Linda, and we are planning to do a live show from there, from the KGRA broadcasting booth, so you don't want to miss it. Stay tuned. For John Burroughs, for Linda Moulton Howe, our very special guest once again, the intrepid Chuck DeCaro, I'm Ray Hobbs, thanking all of you for listening. Stay tuned for 3 hours of Jimmy Church and Fade to Black live right here on Your Contact. For the very best in alternative talk radio topics on the World Wide Web, we're KGRAradio.com. Have a great night and a great weekend, everybody.